Okay, so we are here with the Know Your Role workshop. So what we're going to do today is we're basically going to be clarifying your job on the clarifying your job on the ultimate field and giving you the next steps that you need to do to maximize your impact in that role on the ultimate field. So yeah, make sure you've got a pen and paper if you don't already. Our goal for today is that we want to give you one thing specific that you can start working on and one thing to stop working on and stop worrying about. And that's kind of clutch. So first I'm going to give you some thoughts from Alex Davis. So Alex Davis has been super helpful for me as a friend and collaborator on a lot of projects. We've talked about this issue of role definition multiple times, and he's actually worked with many of my clients. Sometimes I just refer them to him. He has a very detail-oriented way of thinking about this particular topic. So some of what we'll be talking about today has been inspired by him. So I just want to give credit where credit's due. I pulled out a few quotes from him that I thought were kind of interesting. So he says, I encourage athletes and coaches to discipline and deliver their thoughts in the language of roles. What roles does a strategy require? What strategies are currently available to the team given the roles they can actually fulfill? Which roles can you fill as a player? Which roles have a lot of competition or backups, and which are just niche roles where you just need one player? And what skills would you need to refine or fill a role better, or any other role, or another role entirely if you want to switch? So just a lot of thoughts right there. And then ultimately, as an athlete, being able to deliver a skill set that clearly, in the eyes of the coach, fills a role is one of the basic requirements to getting onto a team and earning playing time. Where many athletes go wrong is that they forget this and spend too much time working on facets of their game that bring them no closer to filling useful roles. And that's kind of what we're talking about. Like giving yourself permission to stop working on something. And that's going to be more important the more you progress in your ultimate career. So, for a beginning player, someone with less than, say, like 2 to 3 years experience, you probably will be working on sort of like all the things. But the further on you go, the more you're probably going to want to specialize a little bit or just really hone the things you're good at. And, I wouldn't say forget about the rest, but just, yeah, if you have a specific goal, you want to do the things required to reach that goal. And yeah, okay. So anyway, he goes on to say, where many coaches misstep is recruiting the best athletes without adequately considering what they are best at and what their strategic needs really are. Now, I think this is important because a lot of folks ask me in role discussions about, like, well, what do they do if they don't know what the team wants? And sometimes the truth is, like, the team may not be able to articulate what they want. The team may not be thinking about things that way yet. And so it's really your job as a player. Like, it's ideally, in an ideal world, like, yeah, the coaches, the leadership would have in mind what strategy they want, maybe what roles they need, and they'd be able to communicate that clearly. So first of all, you might not be in an ideal world scenario, and you're probably not, because many coaches are still new at coaching themselves. And then secondly, I think it's helpful to just remember that it's not the selection committee's job, if you're in tryouts, or the coach's job to kind of help you figure out how you are going to get on the team, or help you. I mean, the coach's job is to help develop you as a player when you're on the team. But if you have things like you want to earn more playing time, you want to get on a specific team, it's kind of your job in the end to figure that out. You wouldn't go into a job interview and ask the person, well, like, can you tell me what I need in order to get this job? Like, that's not their role in that situation. Okay, so here we go. What we're going to need for today, again, you're going to need a working pen, pencil, and paper, because I'm going to ask you some questions, and it's going to be helpful if you can just, like, jot down some answers. Now, today we're going to go through this pretty quickly, but we're going to have these questions in the website. So actually, what I'm going to do, yeah, we'll have these questions in a Google Doc in the website. So if you don't catch them all, you can get them there. And we'll have the recording of this in the website too. So if you want to go through this training a little slower, you can do that there. Okay, so let's get started. So why I think this topic is so important is because the more specific we can be about our definitions of what we're trying to do, the quicker and more the quicker we can get more clear feedback on our success and failure of what we're trying to do. So it also means you can more quickly identify your true strengths and also what you want to work on in your game. So again, common mistakes that players make: aiming for a generic goal of getting better at Ultimate. This happens all the time. And that's fine, again, if you're in your first year or two of playing. After that, you might want to start to think about being more specific. Or another common mistake is focusing only on weaknesses, only on the problems in the game, not really recognizing their own strengths and developing them to their full potential, because that can help you further define your role. Or lacking a plan for how to get to the desired level of play. So if your weaknesses are kind of at the minimum needed for your desire of play, then you can really start thinking about specializing and developing your strengths. If you have a specific weakness that is not at the level it needs to be at the minimum level it needs to be at, like a common thing might be catching. If you're not catching at, say, like 90% of the things thrown to you, then you're probably not ready for like an elite level of play. And until you sort that out, doesn't matter how strong your strengths are, that's going to prevent you from playing at the highest level of play. So if you do have true weaknesses, having a plan to get those up to the desired level of play. And then another common mistake is that the actions of the athlete are inconsistent with their desires. Oftentimes is because they have not spent the time to figure out what their desires are, which is what we're doing here, or because they don't have a clear plan of how to actually make progress towards their desires. Okay, so here's just kind of a quick thing about what clarity or lack of clarity might sound like or look like in a player. So if you have lack of clarity on your role, or a player does, they might kind of say things like, they might think to themselves or whatever, like, I'm good or bad or okay at being a handler or being a cutter. So kind of general. And then the comparisons that they tend to fall into is like, okay, I'm better than that player, worse than that other player, or, you know, worse, I'm better handler than that person, or I make less turnovers than that person. These kind of like general things. The more clarity you have, the more specific you are. So clarity of role or clarity is more like, in a certain situation, I can do certain actions effectively. So when I'm trapped on the sideline, I can break the mark effectively to my dump. That would be more clarity. Or at a high stall count, I struggle to release the disc. That would be another kind of clear situation. So so clarity means that you can be more specific about what it is you're trying to do, what your strengths are, and what your weaknesses are, and what your actions are, what your decisions are, that kind of thing. Okay, a bit on why you would want to become a specialist again is, you know, it allows you to become clear about what strengths you need versus what strengths would be nice to have. Helps you understand your fit within the team. And this is important for a tryout plan if you're trying out for a competitive team. And the process of focusing on one role really hones the skills that you need. The skill of defining a role and going for it and developing the skills you need for one role means that if you need to transition to another role, you've already developed the skill of role definition and role acquisition. So that's transferable. Okay, so how do I choose my role? I want you to take a few minutes and just jot down kind of where you're already starting at, what you already have. Do you have any physical attributes or athletic qualities that are above average or below average at your current or desired level of play? Kind of just like, what's the state of the union? So this could be things like, you know, I'm confident breaking the mark. I am taller than average. I'm not taller than average. I'm really quick. You know, any things you currently know about yourself. What skills you currently excel at. It can also be what situations you feel more confident in, most successful, or most effective. Now, with the athletes that I work with, some of the tools that we also use to decide on a role would be things like a self-assessment, you know, have them take an action plan. Some things that some of you have access to would be looking at player philosophy, and that can be found in Anna Ragaki's module in our skills and technique membership. If you're part of that, I think that can be helpful to informing your role. Another thing everyone can do is, talk to captains, former teammates, current teammates. What do they think you're good at? That can just give you like a little bit extra info. They might notice some skills you are undervaluing. It'll also just help to validate if you think you have a skill and they also say you have that skill. Okay, then probably you have that skill. Another thing you can do is, if there's still a lot of like, oh, I don't know, you can try on a role for 3 to 6 months and see how it fits. Again, I think the skill of defining where you're going and making a plan to get there, that in itself is a transferable skill. So if you try for a specific role, say you're trying to be an initiating cutter, and then you try that for 3 to 6 months and you're like, actually, I hate this, or actually, I really cannot figure out how to get open from a stop disc. And I've tried everything I know to fix that. Maybe I should try for a different role. You only know that by committing to one thing and kind of getting a yes, no answer on it. Okay. So let's get started into some further definition or role selection. So defining your role, here's some common divisions to start with. So we'll start general and get more specific. So often players will sort of identify more with being an offensive player or a defensive player. And often players will identify in general with being more of a handler or more of a cutter. Or maybe they'll think they're a mid, or maybe you already have in mind a very specific role, maybe even within a very specific defense. You can write down that. So write down your basic role you want to be. Example, offensive cutter, defensive handler, or anything else that comes to mind. This is kind of the rough draft. Okay, so far so good. Can I see a thumbs up that people can still hear me? Everything's good. All right, so now we're just going to dig into the details a little bit. Okay, so let's say that you chose handler offense. We want to think more specifically about what type of handler you actually are. So even we think of handlers as people being good with the disc, they drive the offense, but even if you look at handlers, there's many types. Okay, so some handlers are really good at throwing the disc very far. You're a hucker, you can huck with accuracy. Some are very good at breaking the mark, and so they have good break mark throws, lots of release points, quick release points, big pivots maybe. You also have handlers that are just good at like moving really quickly. Maybe they don't break the mark with their throws, but because of their knowledge of positioning and their ability to give and go and attack using both their body and quick releases, they create movement. Maybe they're a good distributor that way. Maybe they can also be flexible and go downfield, which makes them hard to cover. You also just might be someone who's smart and knows where the frisbee should go and figures out how to get it there. So that's the role you chose. You might want to think about which type you are or want to be, which sounds attractive. Handler D, again, different types. Maybe if you're playing D on a handler, you might have an excellent high pressure mark, and that's how you contribute to defending handlers. Or maybe you play excellent shutdown defense against the reset handlers, and maybe you're very agile, you can cover those squirrely handlers, quick change of direction. So if you're quick, maybe that's what you do. If you often handlers cover handlers for better or for worse. So if you are a defensive handler, so you play defense and then get the disc, often you're getting the disc in transition. So can you make good choices quickly? Are you comfortable with the chaos of, starting an offense from an unplanned position? Those things might help you be good at being a defensive handler. And again, going through these pretty quickly, but hopefully just sharing information, giving some inspiration. This probably doesn't cover everything, but say you're cutter O, general kinds would be initiating cutter, meaning from a stop disc, whether it's a pull play or whether it's stop disc from a call or the disc goes out of bounds. Can you get open from a stop disc? It's kind of an important thing to get the disc moving. Other cutters are very good deep threats. So you might be very tall. If you're above average, that can be a good role for you. Or if you can read the disc well or jump really high, those are all assets for a deep threat kind of cutter. Or you maybe have some good game IQ. You know when to take space. You also know when to create space for others. You have good timing. So you might be a continuation cutter. Or you might be a defensive cutter, playing defense on cutters or being a cutter when the disc is turned. So can you play shutdown defense, pretty much the mirror of the offensive cutters? Can you play shutdown defense on primary cutters and prevent them from getting open off a stop disc, make the offense hard to start from the stop position? Can you take the big matchups in the end zones? Again, if you are large, tall, have good reading ability, good hops, could be a good role for you. Or, are you a flexible type of defender where you can not only cover your person, but maybe have good field awareness and help others out when needed? Or, do you have a flustering mark? So if you're covering a cutter, these are known maybe not to be as good of thrower. So if you have a really excellent mark, your cutter gets the disc, can you disrupt the offense in those ways? Okay, so just checking in again. How are we doing? If you give me a thumbs up if you've got a roll down on paper to start with. Okay, and can I see a thumbs up if you've at least had one new idea so far from this conversation? All right, great, big thumbs up. Okay, so we're gonna ask some more clarifying questions, diving in deeper or just expanding some thoughts. I also think it's important to just consider some psychological components. So just some roles and positions are more sort of high profile than others, more visible than others. Some teams may value certain roles more than others. So for example, especially like newer teams may really value large players that can catch floaty discs in the end zone, things like that, very visible. You can see when it's happening, and might not value things they can't see as much, say like a player who knows when to clear out and make space for others. That's something that only experienced players can see. So not everyone's going to be able to see that when that's happening. So I think it's just bring some awareness to those are some factors as you're deciding and choosing on your role. Does it fit with your personality and playing philosophy? Again, you can kind of work on your playing philosophy in the skills module. So I think where this comes into play is like, if you are someone who wants to be in the spotlight, wants to be noticed, that's important to you and your ego, maybe easier to just not fight that if you know that about yourself. And just think about that. Maybe you might not be happy being a continuation cutter if you really want to be seen. Or likewise, if you're if you are playing defense on larger cutters, are you okay with the fact that you might end up being posterized with someone skying you? Is that going to be all right with you and your personality? I think those are just kind of just another thing to consider, your own psychology. And for others, they really like the idea of just doing their job, and they're totally okay with not being noticed or only being noticed by other people who know what's going on, and they're happy as long as they're doing their job. And some of them are very happy to not be in the spotlight. So it just depends. Also, other things to consider is, does this fit the idea of the role you want? Does it fit with your current or future team? So let's say that you want to be a handler who hucks a lot. If your team already has 4 or 5 of those, or the team you're trying out for already has a bunch of those, your odds of making that team are not going to be as high if those players, say, have more experience or are more accurate than you. That just might not be the best fit. You might need to think about who you want to try out for, or you might want to think about maybe developing some other types of roles. Just something to consider. And also, is the role you want one that your team can even recognize and see? So I have many clients who they really want to be like the types of defenders who shut down their player, maybe aren't laying out everywhere, maybe aren't in the end zone, but just their player never gets the disc. And again, that's something that's not as easy to see. So if that's what you want to do, is that something a selection committee can notice at tryouts? Is it something that you can verbalize if it's not visible? Other things might be your handler that likes to distribute it a lot. Maybe that's not as visible, but if you can talk about what you're trying to do and just bring awareness to that's what you're doing, can be helpful. Okay, we're going to ask some more questions. All right, and I think this is kind of where we're getting at. What do you actually going to work on? What 3 to 5 main actions does the person in this role do most frequently? And by this question, I mean really specifically, what are the main types of cuts? Where do they start from? Where do they go? And maybe also what are the top 3 types of throws a player in this role is going to throw? So if you're an offensive cutter cutting to the end zone a lot, then you're probably not also going to be hucking it a lot because you're going to be catching it at or near the end zone. Do they throw to the break or open side? Do they have a type mark on them or no? If you like to be a give and go handler, you may not ever really have or ideally you might not have a type mark on you very much. Or if you want to be someone who picks up the disc from a stopped position, then you will have a type mark on you. Okay, and then even more specifically, when we think about in the flow of the game, who are you usually receiving the disc from? Are you receiving it from a hucking type of handler? Do you think you'll receive it from a give and go handler? Are you a continuation cutter receiving it from an initiation cutter? Is the person that you're receiving it from going to be facing you when they receive the disc? Or are they going to have to turn around, look for you? You can also think about on your current team, as you're thinking about how to fit in better, who are the actual specific people that are in the roles you're receiving it from? Because that can also inform what kinds of conversations that you want to have over the next few weeks about maybe what that person wants to see on the field. And you know specifically who you're going to be forming close relationships with. Yeah, so another question I think kind of already asked, what top 2 spaces or types of cuts are you covering? Oh yeah, covering on defense. If you're on defense, you're covering zigzaggy cuts, you're covering long, speedy cuts. Are those cuts originating from a stop position, from a moving position? Okay, so hopefully those questions give you some things to think about. All right, I think what I want to do now is, I think I'm going to stop there and check in. Give you a few minutes to keep writing. I'm also going to check on what's in my slides. Yeah, so by now you should have a role. You should have an idea of the most important skills and activities kind of more clearly defined. Maybe you have an idea of at least one thing you need to work on. And then we can also look at permission to not work on some things that are already adequate in that role or less important in that desired role. So just quick check-in, has this been helpful? Have you been able to think about things in a little bit of a new way? Thumbs up. Okay, excellent. All right, so yeah, we have a few minutes. So yeah, are there any of those questions that were particularly challenging for you?
I think they're good.
Think they're good? Okay, what
Complicated.
what was that?
Nothing is complicated. It's just
Nothing too
like
complicated?
simple. As I understood, you be in one rule, like in the game, and you have to answer this question, right?
Well, the way I think of this is for like a player who's sort of figuring out how they want to fit into their team for like the season, and trying to think like kind of more long term about where their career is going, say in the next like 1 to 3 years. So yeah, I mean, you can also think of it, I mean, so your situation is a little different, right? So you're coaching players who are newer, you're newer yourself. So I think a helpful way for you to think about this is, yeah, maybe you just kind of want to think about it in terms of like, what roles actually are there on the field? And yeah, and I think as a kind of in a coaching role, you can kind of help, maybe help players sort of think about them for themselves too, like where do they actually want to play? And yeah, and I think for newer players and newer teams, it's helpful to shift people around and let people try different roles, different positions, see what they're good at. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then how about you? What role did you come up with for yourself?
For me, or you talk to?
No, I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I think I would be good at handling and the center.
Okay.
So like we have some struggles to move it to the middle of the field, and then for the catching in the end we have a good tall people. I'm not tall, and I'm not that athletic to run fast also. I would say below average. But I think it's quite good to be in the center, like where to throw the disc and making a space also as one of your questions. So making the space is really important thing instead of just stacked in one corner or one stuff. That's usually what's happening with most of the new players. Like, yeah, I'm here, and they all standing.
Yeah. Well, so let's look at like what would be then your like what are the main, say, 3 throws that you're throwing?
Backhand and forehand, the normal ones, and rarely hammer, because I wouldn't say we have really good catching hands because I'm a beginner. So if it's not like really smooth and straight, it's hard to catch.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if you were going to kind of like use this kind of method, then it would just tell you, okay, people aren't maybe ready to catch hammers. So it'd be better for my team if I work more on really accurate backhands and forehands. And that might not be what you want to do long term, but just like, that's just how you would possibly think about it.
Yeah, the zigzag is working a lot, like the give and go. It's working a lot, very good with the high efficiency with the new players, because like, just give go, and point.
Right. Okay. So give go. So you actually, when we get more specific about what kind of throws we're throwing, you're throwing throws that are maybe, 10 meters, 15 meters, if that, maybe even 5 meters.
Yeah.
Yeah. But not as many throws that are 40 meters or 60 meters.
No, that's just like, it's like we take it, but it's a high shot, like gambling. Even you catch it or let it slip.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So your most common throws then are probably backhands that are maybe 10 meters or 5 meters.
Yeah, I would say 10, 20, something like this.
Okay. And then are you usually throwing them to other handlers or to cutters? Do you know?
No, usually we're throwing them to the cutters, as you said, that they don't cut, but yani. So to the center, then they give it back to me. I'll be in the center after I was a handler, and then throw it to the end zone, to the cutters, the runners in the deep. So that's most of the time working.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you can see that you have pretty, even though you're sort of relatively new, you already have developed some pretty common patterns in your own play, and you can sort of identify those and think about how to make those even better. So it sounds like you do give and go with the cutter, and then maybe you're also throwing it far to the people in the end zone.
If there's a good handler, like usually me and the other good player be in different teams, so kind of equal. So if he was the handler, and he's of course much better good handling than me, so I'll be actually the runner. I
Sure.
like to run and catch the disc.
Yeah.
So it's working.
Yeah. Okay. So has this been helpful, and can you kind of think about how you can help use this to help others think about the skills they want to work on?
Yeah, I think for the things or the question that we ask for, I put usually plans, but it's hard to apply. Like, you know, in the training, the last time we were taking the diamond cut, and the training, everyone was doing perfect. But in the game, there were just like two people walking around, and it's like, okay, guys, one defender is enough to block three of you, not just
Right.
two. So it's like it's much harder to apply with the stress and the tension in the match than it is in the training. So the training is all good, it's fine, it's working, and then we're trying to apply it in the real match is not working that much. And unfortunately, the thing that I'm bad at is like control my anger. I won't say anger, but yani, my tension or my tone. So I just it's like, no, we didn't do this. So
Yeah.
this I'm really bad at. So I'm talking too much, and the high tone is not good, I would
Well,
say.
like, yeah, I mean, acquiring coaching skills takes time. So, you know, have some patience with yourself as well.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I mean, maybe just another way to think about this, if specifically having people be in the same space on the field is a common issue, well, maybe it's like, okay, for these people, their job today is to be the cutters that will cut to the end zone. So they will only get the disc from another cutter. So they're not even cutting for the handlers. And maybe today for this game, like these people, they're only going to get it from a handler and throw it to another cutter. So then you've defined like, these are your
Which one is
initiating
good
cutters.
and neutral?
Yeah, well,
that's a
you've
good
defined
idea.
like, you're just making people for that game. Maybe you're not telling them you're the initiation cutter. You're just telling them might be like, you're going to get the disc from a handler and you're going to throw it to a cutter. And like, that's the only things. So that could be another way to use the idea of roles to just to help people not only try different things out, but then also try only like one thing at a time, maybe, instead of having everyone running everywhere. Just a thought.
Good thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah, this recording will be in the back end of the membership site, along with the questions that we asked today. So you can refer to that, replay it, play it slower or whatever. So yeah, thanks for showing up. Really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
yeah, it was good to see you again, Bakri. Glad you're doing well.
Thanks.
And I'll see you online again soon.
Great. Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.